Okay, welcome to episode 12 of the Property Prescription. Now, Tony's not here today for this episode, but we've got Alicia Lecky from Property for Doctors. She's our asset manager. So, Alicia, talk about your role and what you do here.
Thanks so much. So I am National Head of Operations here at Performance and Property for Doctors. Really big role, but essentially we look after all of the assets that our clients have. And they may be, one property that may be in Queensland. We may have a large portfolio for a client, 20, 30 properties across all of Australia. And we make sure they receive the same level of service no matter what property it is, no matter what state they're in.
So what makes your role different, and how do you make a doctor's life easier managing all of their rental properties across the country?
Look, I know firsthand that most medical professionals are very, very time poor, and the last thing they want to be doing is worrying about their property and their investment and what's happening in that property. So we can take care of everything behind the scenes for them and make it completely stress-free for them and make sure that they don't have to worry about it. They just get their income each month, they make sure that they're meeting with their advisor, and that is a nice stress-free process.
And maintenance is a big issue, in terms of managing, a doctor's cash flow, the ongoing sort of maintenance repairs. What do you do around that in terms of making sure that you've got a good cash flow and budget and budgeting for those unforeseen repairs?
Look, maintenance in any side of property management is always a really hot topic. People always stress about how much maintenance is going to be on any property. And, we're very aware that once again, the medical professionals, they are time poor and they're wanting to make sure that everything is under control within their properties. So our recommendation is they keep some money aside basically in that kitty so that if maintenance does come forward or does happen, because we all know things happen when you least expect it, and unfortunately, especially in the property management world, and we can take care of all of that. So clients can be as involved or as little as involved as they would like to be through that process. We want to keep them as stress-free as possible. We would obtain all the quotes for them. If they would like to be a part of that process, more than happy to do so as well. Otherwise, if they would prefer that we take control of it and we look after it for them, happy to do so, easily done. We have a great set of tradespeople on hand and on our books that we can rely on. We've used them for many, many years, and we can make sure get the best prices for their work and do a fabulous job.
And what do you see in terms of maintenance, and what do you see things go wrong in terms of, how do you price a rental property, and when you're giving that advice to a doctor in terms of how the rent should be pitched to market? Do you want to take us through that?
Sure. So it also depends on what they would like with the property, as in how fast they would like it rented. Some clients say, look, I'd prefer to keep it vacant. We're not in a hurry. We'd just like to make sure we get the highest price possible. And that's okay if they're not in a hurry. However, once again, depending on seasonality as well, because that does play a big part in how quickly we can lease a property and what the vacancy rate is at any given time. It really depends on what the client's needs are. Our recommendation is that we price it competitively in the market. We don't want it to be sitting there for weeks on end, because obviously on realestate.com and those websites that we advertise on, the longer it sits on that website available, the further down the path it seems to go. And for a lot of people, if they're seeing a property online for a considerable amount of time, it goes stale and people start to think something's wrong with it. So we'd like to market it competitively so it leases within a week or two. And we'll make sure through that process, we're conducting multiple open for inspections per week, along with those private inspections along the way, because we're also mindful that those premium properties that we're leasing out, they may not be best used for an open for inspection. Those clients that we're attracting to those properties may actually prefer a private inspection. And it just also allows us to get to know the client as well when we're taking them through privately.
And talk to me about the new rental laws. They've come into effect in Victoria just recently. So how are you dealing with that? How are you dealing with your doctors in terms of making sure the properties are maintained and up to standard? And it's not just in Victoria, it's happening all over the country.
It certainly is, but unfortunately it seems to be in Victoria. We have these new rental laws quite often. And I'm sure, and I have no doubt that I'm sure the other states will soon follow suit, as they normally tend to do. The new rental laws that have come into effect recently, look, we do need to be aware of them because there are some big changes happening in this. What has happened in the past with our minimum standards, for example, we've been able to advertise a property without the minimum standards being completely rectified. as long as those minimum standards are done once a renter moves in or prior to a renter moving in. That has now changed. So before we advertise a property now, we have to ensure that those minimum standards are actually all rectified and completed so that when we advertise the property and we're taking people through, it is all ready for someone to move in.
What are the minimum standards like in terms of going through? So in terms of what does the client need to do to make sure they're maintained?
There is quite a bit to do nowadays in terms of those minimum standards. And to be honest, I think there's going to be more of them because there are more talks around the REIV at the moment about further minimum standards coming into play. At the moment, some of the minimum standards we have around gas and electrical compliance, we need to make sure they are signed off by licensed tradespeople, that there aren't gas leaks, that all the wiring is correct and up to date as well. But on top of that, the other minimum standards are that there are lockable windows in all the rooms. The front door, back door must have deadlocks. Other ones that have now come into play are blinds, for example, must have those anchor points on them. They are talking at the moment about further minimum standards around insulation in ceilings, which is going to be a really interesting one, I think, when that comes into play. I don't know how many property managers are going to be excited to get into roof cavities and check that out, but we'll see how we go with that.
So these new rental laws and the minimum standards, do you want to expand a little bit further on that?
Yes, there's a few of them, to be honest. A really good one for clients to know and for property managers and all the property professionals out there to make sure they're adhering to is that the notice periods have changed. So one of the things they've actually just launched is that we can't actually issue a no reason eviction for a tenant, which means they used to have a 90-day end of fixed term notice period. That's actually been abolished as well.
Is that for Victoria? Or?
That is for Victoria, yes. Right. So I dare say the other states will soon follow suit yet again because they have with the other ones as well that have been abolished. For example, in Victoria, they used to have a 120-day no reason notice. That actually ended about 3-4 years ago. Other states followed suit. Now this one, the 90-day end of fixed term notice, once again, that has been abolished. All the 60-day notices that were in effect, for example, landlord moving in, property to be sold, under renovations, used to be a 60-day notice to vacate. They have all been pushed to 90 days. So I think it's really important for property professionals to be aware of that, but also, our medical professionals as well. If that you are purchasing properties, there is a tenant in place at the moment, you're wanting to move in, whatever it may be, you need to now give them the 90-day notice rather than that 60-day notice.
It's a lot harder to remove them in the event that you want to sell or do something to it.
100% right. So it is a lot harder to remove someone from their home nowadays. Then another one to note in particular that we have always been using, especially in Victoria, but I know other states have been as well, is they've stopped rental bidding completely across the board, which means if we're advertising a rental property at a certain price point, say for example it's $1,000 a week, and someone offers $1,200 a week, which to be honest,
it's happening in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane.
It happens more
Perth,
than we think.
We're seeing it as well.
It happened to me yesterday in Victoria, for example. Yep. We actually have to say no to that. So even though we would love to sometimes say yes, we can't actually accept that. Same as if someone would like to pay 6 months in advance, we've always encouraged that. Especially if it's an applicant that, has just had an influx of money, for example, they really want to secure the property, they love the property. What's their point of difference for their application? Let's offer 6 months in advance. We now can't accept it.
Really?
Correct. So we now have to only have renters pay month by month. So I think it's really important for clients across the board to know this kind of thing. Yes, it is in Victoria at the moment, but like I said, I have no doubt that other states are soon going to follow suit with this.
And a little trick as well in terms of when you offer a tenant a lease, rather than property being vacant in January, what are you doing? You're offering 7-month lease, 13-month leases.
Correct. And I've done this since the dawn of time, basically. In my 25 years of property management, I've always encouraged clients, if they have a lease that expires in December, January, I will always say to the client, let's do a 13 or 14-month lease. Because the last thing you want is your property to become vacant a week before Christmas when everything quietens down.
And how many agencies do we see when we take the management over, when the lease ends just before Christmas and they've got a month of vacancy because nothing happens during that period?
My mind boggles. It just blows me away that agencies are still offering a 12-month lease at that period of time. It is not protecting the client whatsoever, because if your property becomes vacant the week, even 2 weeks before Christmas, I can guarantee it's still going to be vacant mid-January.
Yeah, we see it all the time.
All the time. And so I can't encourage clients more than making sure that their property manager, and I can guarantee you here where we are, our staff will be offering that 13, 14-month lease because we want to make sure that client is protected during that time for the tenant as much as the owner.
Yeah. And it's quite seasonal in every state, that we're managing those properties in terms of the month that it becomes vacant. When that lease gets terminated. So we're always budgeting and looking forward ahead. So I think it's a great call in terms of some of the stuff that you're doing on the ground nationally.
Yeah, thank you. I think, one more thing to note for clients as well when they're looking at purchasing in each state is that Victoria, different rules obviously across each state, which is confusing as such, but also something to be mindful of. So in Victoria, we can't force a tenant to go onto a fixed term lease. So once their initial 12-month period lease ends, if those tenants would like to go on a periodic lease, so that's a month-to-month tenancy, they can. We can't actually force them to sign a new lease agreement. In other states, for example, like a Queensland property, at the end of their lease, you can give them a notice to vacate and a fixed-term lease, and they have to kind of pick one. So it's very rare up in Queensland that you'd have a tenancy on a periodic tenancy.
There's obviously different maintenance issues in each particular state with different types of properties. So the heritage properties with an overlay have common maintenance issues. The new builds that we manage quite a few. There's obviously been issues with cladding as well, which has been a big issue in Melbourne the last sort of 3 to 5 years. Are you seeing any particular, or would you advise a doctor to stay away from a type of property that has too much maintenance? What are you seeing on the ground?
Look, it's kind of like how long is a piece of string with that kind of thing, to be honest. I think each property and each type of property does have their own kind of maintenance around that and liability around that as well. Obviously, like you suggested, those older properties can have some issues when it comes to foundations, and something we definitely need to look at. Nothing that a building inspection, obviously, when you purchase the property, can't kind of look into as well. New builds, especially high rises and those apartment blocks, definitely do have some challenges, so to speak.
We've run into a number of issues with some of our doctors that have owned properties that have been cladding affected in Sydney and in Melbourne, and we've had to get them out of that particular contract, or we actually can't sell that property as well because there's cladding issues. So you have to proportion the discount when you're selling that asset due to the cladding issues in them.
And that's a really good point too. The other thing we often find in those high-rise buildings are balconies, that they haven't been waterproofed correctly, and that has catastrophic effects once a tenant moves in. A lot of the time, once again, if the landlord doesn't have the proper insurance, which is another topic to a completely different kettle of fish that we need to launch into at some point, but that can obviously be very problematic for clients because we may need to rehouse tenants in there. Insurance may not cover it, for example, but also it can cause a huge amount of damage for apartments below that as well.
And we saw that in Brisbane with some of our rental properties in terms of getting trades out there in a reasonable time frame. The roof, the stumps, they're all weatherboard. The ongoing maintenance in particular states is always different. Storm damage.
Yes.
So making sure, talk about the insurance, making sure that clients have got the right insurance in place is super important.
100%. We want to make sure the clients all have their building insurance, of course, but we need to make sure they've got their landlord insurance as well. There are some really good reputable landlord insurance companies who specialise in landlord insurance out there. So you can get it through your normal bank insurance, etc. However, we can't recommend anyone technically, but I would strongly encourage people to look at that landlord insurance component. The landlord insurance component in itself is around $280, $300 per annum. So it's not expensive, but it is a great thing to have. It will cover them for their public liability. It will cover them for loss of rent. But once again, those unique landlord insurance companies will sometimes offer that fine print that the other ones may not.
Yeah, so if you're a tenant in Sydney and you're paying $1,000 a week for a one-bedroom unit,
which is possible,
which we're seeing, and that tenant stops paying their rent.
Yeah.
So talk us through the process if you're a landlord in terms of what you would do in that particular instance.
100%. And that is something that our property managers here are very conscious of as well. And we do a lot of training around this because it does impact what the insurance will cover at the end of the day. One of the big things is we need to make sure, and all clients need to make sure, that their property manager is acting as soon as that renter falls into arrears. there are certain steps that need to be followed to ensure that their insurance does cover that. Because I've seen so many horror stories in the past, and we've taken over properties, unfortunately, in the past here, where they've been with another agency, the property manager hasn't followed process, and unfortunately, because they haven't issued a notice to vacate on day 15 or day 14, depending on your state as well, that will impact the client's insurance because the property hasn't acted in the landlord's best interest, which means it will have a financial impact for the owner and their insurance may not cover it.
Yeah. And what we're finding is a lot of the tenants are getting the raw end of the stick at the moment. You know, rents are increasing. There's a lack of supply going into the market. So I think talk about the way we look after our tenants, and they're very important to the sort of long-term stability of building our clients' portfolios and what you do for your tenants.
They really are. And I think I would love for more clients to look at it that way, rather than just thinking they're a renter in a property and they're going to pay off my mortgage and pay my rent. We need to really look after our renters because a lot of the time people will rent where they want to live and they will purchase elsewhere as well and rent that property out. So a lot of the time we actually find that our renters are actually owners as well, but we really want to look after our renters. We need to make sure they feel really at home and that they can feel like it is their home in this property. It is not that they're paying off someone else's mortgage. So we make sure when our renter is moving into the property, they get a full handover of the property. A lot of the time, if possible, we meet them at the property and walk them through the property at that time the tenancy starts. We show them where the main switch is. We show them where the bins go. We show them those little 1%ers that a lot of agents don't do. They just let them pick up the keys at reception and off they go, kind of thing. The other kind of things that we're starting to introduce now here are renter gifts. So we're giving our clients the opportunity to spoil and play Santa to some of our renters as well. Recently, we've just launched a product where we can have our landlords buy our renters a Christmas gift, for example.
You've done a few of those for me this year. So
yes. Thank you for opting in for those.
Yes.
Your renters will be well looked after, which is great.
Good.
But we've had 20% of our clients so far. It hasn't closed yet, and we're seeing more and more come through every day. But in the first 4 days, we had 20% of our entire portfolio nationwide opt in for these client gifts, and that's huge.
I think it's a great idea, and just making sure that the tenants are recognised. If they're good renters and they stay in our clients' properties long term, I think they need to be rewarded as well. So I think it's a great initiative.
A happy tenant in a property is so important because they're going to look after the property. They're more inclined to stay if they know they're well looked after and pay their rent on time. They want to do the right thing.
So Alicia, talk about all the rental increases that you're seeing across the country. So we're getting 40, 50 applicants applying for a Sydney rental, 20, 30 applicants applying for Brisbane, Melbourne, in all the really good quality suburbs. What are they doing about it in terms of making sure the rent's at a reasonable rate?
It's a really challenging one, and obviously each state is slightly different here as well. You know, it's difficult when you're an agent, but it's also difficult for an owner because you obviously want to get the best price for that client. But there are now restrictions in play as to how much you can increase the property for rent, not only when you're advertising the property, but when you're doing those rent increases at the end of that fixed term period. You used to be able to, back in the day, increase rents across the board every 6 months. That's now been brought back. You can only increase rent once per year. And that is also challenging for an owner if they're wanting to plan ahead. But also if the property is severely, and unfortunately, like I said before, we've seen this previously when we've bought properties across from other agencies, across the board in every single state, that the properties are severely underleased because they've obviously just thrown anyone in as quick as they can to get it leased and get it off their books. But the owner's been missing out on a considerable amount of money across a 12-month period because it's been severely underlet. So then for us to try and increase that rent, we can't do that full whack that we normally would, where, you know, if it's underleased by $100 a week, we actually can't increase it that much. We're going to have to make sure that we increase, you know, every 12 months, but it's going to take some time to get it up there. So then we have to speak to the client about, is it better to let this renter go and start fresh and re-advertise the property at the market rent? Or are we really happy with the renter and we need to plan this over a number of years to make sure it's up to market?
It can set the market rental back 2 to 3 years.
100% it can.
It's underlet.
And that's a lot of income then that the client is missing out on.
Yeah. And so what do you do when you've got tenants that have offered $200 more than the asking rent, which we're seeing a lot in Brisbane and Melbourne? Not so much in Adelaide, but in Perth, we've seen a lot of this as well.
Perth is a lot, yes. We're getting a lot there.
Given the vacancy rate so low over there, like, what do you do in that instance?
We're not allowed to accept it, unfortunately. Laws have changed, so we're not allowed to actually accept if a tenant applies at a higher price, we're not allowed to accept that price.
Yeah.
We have to take the advertised price, which is unfortunate, really unfortunate for all parties, but we have to take it from the application's point of view.
Yeah.
So what it looks like on paper, and of course their references, and we make sure we do the thorough reference checking across the board.
Yeah, spot on. All right, we'll finish it off there. Thank you very much.
Beautiful.
Today, Alicia.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we look forward to getting great outcomes for our tenants across the country.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks.